The ivory envelope lay on my desk, its edges slightly worn. The blocky, aggressive handwriting of my name screamed from its surface. It was a style I recognized instantly from the birthday card stuck haphazardly to my fridge. That alone should have set off alarm bells. My two stepdaughters hadn't spoken to me with anything more than polite disinterest for the past half year. Now, all of a sudden, I warranted a handwritten note? I sliced it open, steeling myself for some teenage sneer, maybe another laundry list of ways I'd failed them. Instead, two sheets of paper slid out. The first was a printed email. The second, a paternity test. My vision blurred before my eyes had even registered the header, and a tremor shook my hand. The test appeared genuine. It bore the same lab logo my sister-in-law had used years ago when her adopted daughter needed genetic confirmation for medical reasons. The fields were filled. Possible father Silas G. Harding. Child W. Noah Harding. The result? Probability of paternity, 0%. The room seemed to tilt. I dropped the papers onto the desk and just stared blankly ahead. I stood there, paralyzed, for what felt like an eternity. My breath fogged my glasses, cleared, fogged again. I blinked, but the world refused to snap back into focus. A line from the email leaped out at me. "We deserve honesty. Stop with the lies." And beneath it, scrawled in Bella's familiar handwriting, were 5 words that would forever haunt me. "You're just a temporary stand-in." No apology, no request to talk, just that simple, brutal dismissal. That Tuesday, I broke my 15-year streak of perfect attendance at work. I didn't even bother to call in. I spent the day in my study, surrounded by old books. I wasn't planning anything drastic, just numb. There's a harsh truth no one tells you about being a stepdad. Sometimes your role doesn't end in some tragic accident or final goodbye in a hospital room. Sometimes it ends because 2 young women you helped raise hand you a piece of paper and casually declare you irrelevant. It wasn't even about genetics. It was about the sting of being erased, of counting for less than 0. When Arya arrived home that evening, I didn't utter a word. I simply placed the envelope in front of her dinner plate. She barely registered any surprise, more like mild annoyance. "Jasper said you might react this way," she muttered, as if this was all some pre-scripted drama. "They're hurting, Silas. They both are." I asked the one question that clawed its way out of my throat. "Who is he?" She focused on her food, refusing to meet my gaze. "It doesn't concern you." That was the precise moment something inside me fractured. No dramatic crack, no earth-shattering explosion, just a quiet internal collapse. For 2 decades, my entire existence had revolved around these 3 individuals. Every decision, every compromise, every premature gray hair was because of them. And in return, I was a disposable extra, an actor reading from the wrong script. If they genuinely believed I wasn't their father, then maybe I needed to stop pretending I was. That night, I hatched a plan. It began not with rage, but with the one thing they least expected: silence. What came after that, they couldn't possibly foresee. I didn't say a word to them for the next 72 hours. Not to punish them, but because I genuinely had nothing left to say. What do you say to people who casually peel off your identity like a sticky label and hand it back to you, wrinkled and useless? On the surface, everything remained the same. I woke up, made coffee, went to work, picked up groceries, answered emails. Yet a subtle, almost imperceptible shift had occurred within the walls of the house, as if they were now listening more intently, or perhaps they always had. Arya started angling her phone screen away from me, even more than usual. She had done this before years ago, when I still assumed the best of her. This time, I simply registered it and filed it away in the same mental compartment as the damning paternity test. Willow and Bella largely remained out of sight. Willow didn't even acknowledge me when we passed in the hallway. Bella at least offered a perfunctory nod, but it felt hollow, as if she were simply ticking a box on an invisible checklist. Neither of them apologized, neither attempted to initiate a conversation. They were simply done with me, And honestly, that was the deepest cut of all. Not the deception, not even the perceived genetic lie, but the ease with which they could detach. On Friday evening, I returned home to find them clustered in the living room, glued to a laptop screen. Arya stood behind them, arms crossed, as if overseeing a presentation. Suitcases sat by the front door. I knew instinctively what was coming. "We're staying at Aunt Penelope's for a while," Willow announced, her tone almost breezy. "We just need space," Bella chimed in, her voice echoing Willow's. Arya remained silent, her gaze fixed on me as if this departure was overdue, as if I should be thanking them for doing what I couldn't. I nodded, offering no questions or objections. Willow hoisted her bag. "This is probably for the best." Then she uttered something that still reverberates in my mind. "We're finally free now." Free from what? From me? I almost chuckled, not out of amusement, but in the stunned, hollow way people laugh at funerals when someone says something so shockingly inappropriate that all you can do is exhale disbelief. They left without a farewell. The door didn't slam. It clicked softly shut. That night, I found myself drawn to the attic, a space I hadn't entered in years. I wasn't seeking anything in particular, just the comforting weight of dust and forgotten objects. Behind an old rocking horse, I discovered a cardboard box labeled "Girls' Stuff." Inside were childhood drawings, faded birthday cards, school report cards, and near the bottom, an envelope I didn't recognize. It was addressed to Arya, bearing a 2005 postmark. I opened it, revealing a handwritten letter from a man named Gideon, the same name that had surfaced in a comment on Arya's social media feed some months prior. I still think about what we had. I know we both made mistakes, but I can't help but wonder what our children might have looked like. Our children. The breath hitched in my throat. I reread the sentence several times, willing myself to misinterpret it, but the implication was unmistakable. This wasn't a casual fling, a brief indiscretion. This was a choice, a secret Arya had carried with her every day while smiling across the dinner table at me. She had maintained this connection with Gideon through social media, through shared memories, through lies. The worst part was, he knew. He knew about the girls, about me. He even referenced me in a footnote at the bottom of the letter. If he ever discovers this, I'm sorry, but I've never stopped thinking of them as mine. Gideon had laid claim to them. Arya had passively accepted that claim. And now my stepdaughters, whom I had raised with every ounce of love and care I possessed, had internalized it. I wasn't their father, not genetically, not in their hearts. I was simply the provider, the reliable presence. I sat there for hours, surrounded by the ghosts of memories I had once cherished. The birthday candles I'd lit, the scraped knees I'd kissed, the tears I'd wiped away, all meaningless now. But there's a strange power in being quietly erased. You begin to view your life not as a tragedy, but as something salvageable. If I wasn't their father, if I wasn't her husband, then who was I? Perhaps it was time to find out, not by leaving, but by allowing them to experience the true meaning of absence. I didn't pack a bag, didn't script a dramatic exit, didn't burn bridges or pen a scathing goodbye letter. Instead, I did something quieter, something far more devastating. I stayed, but I began to systematically erase myself from their lives. The following morning, I awoke earlier than usual, not because I was restless, but because I craved the silence. I stood in the hallway, just outside their empty rooms. Willow's door was ajar, revealing the disorganized chaos of a teenager who had moved out without bothering to make her bed. Bella's room still carried the faint scent of her citrus perfume. Their absence didn't bring me peace, but a haunting emptiness. I went downstairs and methodically removed every photograph from the living room. Not to destroy them, not to create a spectacle. I simply turned them all around, facing the wall. It was a symbolic act, I suppose. If they'd already rendered me invisible with their version of the truth, I was simply catching up. Then I performed a seemingly insignificant act that resonated with seismic force. I changed my contact name in Arya's phone. I had done it once years ago during a brief playful phase, altering it to the boss. She had laughed then. We were still supposedly in love. This time, I chose something different. Unknown number. Then I placed the phone back on its charger in the kitchen, next to her favorite mug. It wasn't an act of vengeance, but a mirror, reflecting what I had become in that house. Arya returned around noon, alone. Her hair was pulled back, as if she'd been crying during the drive. I was in the garage, finally fixing the shelf that had been wobbly for months. She passed by me in silence, a flicker of hesitation at the door. The next day, she broached the subject. "You turned all the pictures around." I didn't look up. "They were facing the wrong way." She sighed, weary of metaphors. "Silas, they're just kids. They're trying to figure things out." "Were you trying to figure things out when you allowed someone else to be their father, behind my back?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She didn't respond. "I found Gideon's letter," I added. "You kept it." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. "Why him?" I asked. "What did he offer that I didn't?" Arya finally looked at me, not with guilt or anger, but with sheer exhaustion. It wasn't about him. It was about not feeling trapped. I was 23, married, pregnant, scared. He made me feel like I still had options. And I didn't? No, you chose this. She spoke as if I should be proud, as if being the man who chose them elevated me, rather than rendering me disposable. Later that night, I stumbled upon an old external drive in my desk drawer. It contained every home video we had ever made. Birthday parties, dance recitals, vacations. I watched one, just one, in which Willow ran to me after scoring a goal at her soccer game, screaming, "Did you see that, Silas?" I had shouted back, "That's my girl!" But I guess she never was. I unplugged the drive and placed it in the donation box, not because I didn't value the memories, but because they no longer belonged to me. I've been playing a supporting role in someone else's movie for 2 decades, and now the credits had rolled. Only they had forgotten to let me leave the theater. That night, Arya knocked on the door of the spare room, the room I had claimed 2 weeks earlier, even before the truth had surfaced. I didn't answer. She opened the door anyway. "I think we should talk," she said. "I don't," I replied. "You're still their father," she insisted. "Maybe not in blood, but—" I cut her off. "You don't get to make that declaration now." She nodded slowly, but I saw something flicker across her face. Not sadness, not regret, but fear. It was the first time I realized that perhaps I wasn't the only one who was lost now. Arya had played her role so flawlessly for so long that she believed it. Would never crumble, but it was, and she had no idea how to improvise. That night, I finally began writing my own script. The next morning I made a list, not of revenge or legal threats or custody battles, just a list of what was undeniably mine: my tools, my records, my car, my savings, my sense of self. And I began to separate them from the household, piece by piece, quietly, deliberately. They believed they were pushing me out of their lives. What they failed to grasp was that I was finally pushing back, not with fury, but by transforming myself into a man they could no longer access. The more they noticed, the more panic seemed to set in. Even if I was merely a stand-in to them, I had been the one holding the entire structure together. I had always been the one to fill the silences, the first to say, "Good morning," even when met with stony silence. I texted reminders about appointments, birthdays, oil changes. I left post-it notes on the fridge saying, "Took out the trash. Love you." I provided the conversation, the warmth, the glue. When I stopped talking, things around the house started unraveling far faster than I anticipated. Arya kept waiting for the ice to break. She wasn't accustomed to silence, at least not from me. She attempted neutral conversation starters. "Did you see the water bill?" "The neighbor's dog got loose again." Or, "Did you want to pick up dinner tonight?" I didn't ignore her, just offered one-word answers. Detached, flat, because that's all I was now, detached. Then came the texts, first from Arya. Willow wants to come by and get some things. Me. Fine. Arya. Can we talk after work? Me. No. Then from Willow herself. I know you're angry. Me. Nope. Willow. It wasn't supposed to come out like that. Me. You said what you meant. She didn't reply after that. The following weekend, they arrived while I was working in the yard. I could hear their voices inside. At one point, I glanced through the window and saw Willow standing in front of the blank wall where our family photos used to hang. She stared at it, almost puzzled. I didn't go inside until they had left. Later that night, Arya asked me what I wanted. Want? I repeated, as if it were a foreign concept. Yes, Silas, you've been walking around like a ghost. I don't know what you're trying to accomplish. I looked at her, maintaining a calm tone. I want to see what my life looks like when I stop being what you needed me to be. She blinked, caught off guard. So, what? You're just done? I don't know. Maybe I've been done for far longer than I realized. She began pacing, her voice cracking, not from sadness, but from the fear of losing control. This is insane. You can't just opt out. The expression on her face told me she hadn't expected this. She had built a narrative in which her betrayals were minor, forgivable, even justifiable. But now that I was mirroring her detachment, it was unacceptable. Then she delivered the final blow. Gideon passed away last year. I stared at her. She looked down at the floor. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I found out through a mutual friend. I didn't tell the girls. I had no idea why she was divulging this until she added, That's when everything changed for me. That's when I started considering telling you everything. So, let me get this straight, I said slowly. You waited to come clean until the only person who could hold you accountable was dead? Her silence was confirmation enough. And there it was, the final crack in her carefully constructed facade. Arya wasn't guilty, wasn't even confused. She was cornered, not by me, but by the life she had lied her way into, and by the growing realization that I was no longer willing to help prop it up. That night, I went online and searched for lawyers, not because I necessarily wanted a divorce, but because I needed to understand my rights, what I was entitled to walk away with cleanly. If I was going to be erased, I would do it on my own terms. The next week, I began transferring utilities, closing joint accounts, backing up digital files. I even removed myself from the family music streaming plan. Yes, it was petty, but it felt necessary. The silence wasn't working anymore. They needed to feel the emptiness of everything I had maintained, paid for, remembered, carried. That's when the doorbell rang one night. It was Bella, her eyes red-rimmed. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. I said nothing, just stepped aside and allowed her to enter. She stood in the kitchen, nervously twisting the strap of her shoulder bag. "I didn't mean it," she said. "Mean what?" "What I wrote in the email about you being a temporary stand-in." I was angry. "You wrote it," I pointed out. "You believed it." Tears welled up in her eyes. "You were my dad. You always were." I stared at her for a long moment, then asked, "Why didn't you say that when your sister looked me in the eye and denied it?" She couldn't answer, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I recognized something truly painful. They were more afraid of each other's judgment than they were of losing me. That's what made it easy to discard me, easy to rewrite the narrative, because standing up for me would have rendered them vulnerable. So they had chosen each other, and I had finally stopped choosing them. By the end of that week, I had come to terms with something I feared would destroy me. The realization that love, when neglected long enough, doesn't merely fade, it festers. The day commenced like any other, rain pattering softly against the window, casting the interior in a chilly gray light. I sat in my office, sipping lukewarm coffee and sorting through old documents, attempting to distinguish what was worth fighting for from what wasn't. That's when I stumbled upon a folder labeled Drafts. Inside was a stack of unsent letters I had written over the years. Apologies I never delivered. Love notes that felt too revealing. Even a furious tirade from the night I discovered Arya had withdrawn a large sum of money without informing me. I had never printed that one. One letter stood out. It was dated January 1st, 2016, Willow's 15th birthday. I'd written it during a bout of insomnia following an argument with Arya about her supposedly innocent girls' trip to Las Vegas. The letter had never been intended for anyone's eyes. It was raw, honest, a kind of emotional time capsule. If you're reading this, it means I never sent it, which wouldn't surprise me, as I'm a coward when it comes to confrontation. I've devoted years to being the man everyone else needs, instead of the man I am. If I could speak freely, I'd say this. I suspect I'm being deceived. I think there's someone else, and I think, God help me, I've known it for a while. But I've been too scared to investigate, too afraid of what I might uncover. So instead, I convince myself that the truth isn't worth pursuing, that love is about enduring, not understanding. But the reality is, I feel invisible, exploited. And perhaps the cruelest part is that no one seems to notice I'm still here. I reread it 3 times, stunned by the depth of my own disillusionment. Then, I made a mistake. I printed it. I hadn't intended to leave it out, but when I stepped away to take a phone call, I left it on my desk, unfolded, directly beneath the window, visible to anyone standing on the porch. Arya arrived that afternoon to collect some documents for Bella's scholarship application. She used her old key. I wasn't even aware she was there until I heard the soft click of the door. She didn't announce herself, didn't knock on my office door. She simply left in silence. Later that night, I found the letter removed from my desk, folded carefully, as if it had been examined with a magnifying glass. I knew immediately she had read it, and for the first time in weeks, she texted me first. "Silas, I had no idea you felt that way." I stared at the message. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "let's talk," I had no idea. I didn't reply because if she had no idea, it was because she had never wanted to. The following day, it was Bella who showed up again, this time accompanied by Willow. I didn't open the door. I merely watched through the peephole as they stood there, unsure of whether to knock. Eventually, Willow slipped something into the mailbox, and they departed. I waited until the porch was empty before retrieving it. It was a photograph, one I hadn't seen in years. Me, sitting on the couch, holding both of them in my arms as they slept during a movie night. I remembered that evening vividly. We had built a pillow fort, and they had persuaded me to watch some animated movie with them. Even though I had seen it countless times, Arya must have snapped the picture. On the back, in Willow's handwriting, were 5 words. "You were always our dad." I held that photograph for a long time. I wanted it to mean something, to make the ache subside, but all I could think was, then why didn't you say that when I needed to hear it? That's the harsh truth about truth. Timing matters, and sometimes even the most heartfelt apology arrives years too late. The letter I had never sent was meant to remain buried, but now it had become something else, a mirror they couldn't avert their gaze from. I realized something terrifying. They wanted me back, but not because they had finally attained clarity, but because they were afraid of who they might become without me. And I wasn't certain if I could be that man for them anymore, or if I even wanted to. The following weekend, I visited the storage unit, not to retrieve anything significant, but because I needed a place of solace. Somewhere that didn't echo with voices that had once called me Dad, as if it meant something. Somewhere my past couldn't find me. The space was musty, filled with old furniture, wedding gifts we had never bothered to sell, an antique dresser Arya had promised to refinish, the broken rocking chair that had once sat beside Bella's crib. I wasn't digging for skeletons, just seeking a quiet place to exist outside the crumbling timeline of our lives. That's when I found the box. It wasn't mine, or at least I didn't recall packing it, labeled only with the words W. Harding, do not open. I opened it, my heart sinking as I recognized the handwriting on the first page. At first, I assumed it was just old-school papers. I almost put it back, but something told me not to. I flipped to the middle, and what I saw stopped me cold. I wish I didn't know. I wish I'd never Googled it. I wish Mom had never told me, because now when I look at him, I feel like I'm lying too. I used to think Silas would always be there, but now that I know he's not really my father, it feels fake, like I'm pretending. And I hate pretending. It wasn't hatred, wasn't rejection, just guilt. I turned the pages, some scribbled with frantic strokes, some filled with confessions, others resembling letters that would never be sent. He stayed up until 2 a.m. to help me with my science fair project. He made me laugh right before I went on stage for the play. I was so nervous I could have cried. I don't even remember if I won, just that he waited through the whole thing so I'd see him clapping. I froze, remembering that day. I remembered exactly what she wore, the blue sweater she had kept tugging at, the way she whispered, "I can't do this," before walking on stage. I had completely forgotten she ever felt that way about me, because they had made me forget. They had rewritten the narrative and handed me a revised script with half the pages missing. I read on. Mom told me not to tell him, that it would destroy him. But then she told Bella anyway, and now Bella's acting like he's a total stranger. I want to yell at her. I want to yell at myself. I hate how we're treating him. He doesn't deserve this. My hands trembled. For weeks I had lived in silence, believing I had become irrelevant. I had thought I had been replaced in their hearts as easily as I had been replaced in their bloodline. But this wasn't that. This wasn't hatred or indifference, but confusion. A stepdaughter trying to bear a lie that was never hers to begin with. That truth was bleeding out across the lined pages, concealed in a box Arya clearly didn't want me to find. I scanned the storage unit, feeling as if I had stumbled into a hidden part of my own life. I didn't take the journal. I closed it, replaced it in the box, sealed the lid, and walked away, not because I didn't care, but because I knew something significant had shifted. That night, I sat in the dark, clutching the photo of me holding them during a family movie night. I hadn't shed a tear since this ordeal had begun, but I did now. Not out of sadness, but out of something far stranger, hope. And I loathed that sensation because I wasn't sure if it signified that I was healing or about to allow them to hurt me all over again. I didn't return to the storage unit, not because I resisted the urge to finish the journal, but because I needed to assimilate what I already knew. Truth, once revealed, has a radioactive half-life. You can't hold it too long, it changes you. I spent the next few days in what I can only describe as a state of haunted clarity. Everything appeared sharper. Every sound within the house seemed to resonate longer than it should. My body was functioning normally, brushing teeth, folding laundry, answering work calls. But my mind was caught between past and present, between being hated and being missed. Then came the voicemail. It was mid-afternoon. I had just concluded a Zoom meeting when I noticed the missed call on my phone. A private number, one new voicemail. I pressed play. The voice was calm, collected, unfamiliar. "Silas," it began, "this is going to sound strange. I don't expect you to believe me, but I needed to clear my conscience. My name is Declan. I used to work with your wife. I relocated 5 years ago, but I knew what was happening back then. I knew about Gideon and what Arya said about you behind your back." He paused, as if forcing the next words out. "She used to say you were weak, that you would never leave no matter what she did. She said she respected Gideon more because he was dangerous, unpredictable. She would laugh about it sometimes. She told Willow the truth at work one day. I was there. She cried in the break room. Arya told her not to worry because you would never fight back anyway, that you would always be the safe one. My mouth went dry. That's what you were, her safety net. The recording ended. No callback number, no explanation. I listened to it twice, then a third time. I felt something break inside me that I didn't realize was still intact. She had poisoned me in my stepdaughters' lives before they even had a choice. This wasn't merely a betrayal of love, but a betrayal of character, a slow, insidious war she had waged behind my back. Smiling through dinners, vacations, and holidays, all while subtly undermining me in secret. That night, I sat on the floor of the guest room, staring at the heater. I kept circling those words. Utility bill. It wasn't the cruelty that hurt, but the accuracy, because she wasn't wrong. That's how I had existed. Predictable, reliable, filling everyone's gaps while slowly disappearing from view. The perfect safety net, until they began to see me as the net itself, not the person who had built it. This voicemail had burned away the last vestiges of guilt. In its place rose something far more dangerous: resolve. I knew what I needed to do next, and it wasn't about conflict or retribution. It was about reclaiming something for myself. I didn't tell anyone about the voicemail. Not Bella, not Willow, not even my closest friend who had been texting me every week to check in. I needed to hold this card close because I knew instinctively what it meant. Arya's narrative was about to unravel even further. 2 days later, I was sitting in the living room, blinds drawn, lights off, simply watching dust motes dance through the sunlight. When the doorbell rang, I ignored it. It rang again and again. A rhythmic knock followed, quiet but insistent. I opened the door, and there she stood, Arya, looking pale and defeated. She clutched a manila folder and wore the kind of empty expression people get when they realize the fire they ignited is now raging out of control. "Can I come in?" she asked. "No." She didn't argue, just opened the folder and extended it toward me. "What is it?" I asked, refusing to take it. She exhaled slowly, almost in a whisper. "Something I should have given you a long time ago. It's from Gideon." She went on. "Everything inside me locked up before he passed away. He wrote something for you. I kept it. I don't know why." I took the folder, closed the door, and stood in the kitchen holding it as if it were a live wire. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in a meticulous script. "Silas, I imagine you despise me more than you've ever despised anyone. You have every right to. I overstepped. I coveted what was never mine, and I let my weakness cost everyone pain. But the girls, they were never a part of that. They never knew me. I never held them, or took them to amusement parks, or dried their tears. And Nyan kept that door closed, and I respected that. She never stopped loving you." I reread it, allowing each word to saturate my understanding, because the letter was not an apology, but a confession. And somewhere between his sorrow and her silence, I started to understand what everything changed. This was never about biology. It was about the narrative. Nyan has spun this yarn, handed it to our daughters, and watched them believe it. But now the letter, the photographs, the journal all made it something real. Real as those years in the backyard with them. That all mattered. That every hug and tear that I dried meant something, and maybe there was a way to work from there. We could start fresh if they wanted to.